I used to spend a lot of time on the road for work, and I almost always chose inexpensive hotels because all I ever needed was a place to sleep and clean up. I'd never had a single unsettling experience, so I never gave much thought to personal safety or the possibility of something being wrong. That sense of comfort disappeared during a work trip to attend a training session in a small town in Pennsylvania. I checked into an ordinary-looking hotel with a cramped lobby, faded red carpeting that felt heavy with age, and a musty smell that reminded me of visiting my grandmother years ago. The woman at the front desk handed me a key without much conversation, and I took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. The hallway was unnervingly quiet, almost hollow, like the building was holding its breath. My room itself looked harmless enough, a narrow bed, a desk pushed against the wall, and a small bathroom. I dropped my bag, turned on the television, and tried to unwind after hours of driving. After a shower and some mindless TV, I drifted off. Sometime later, a faint sound dragged me out of sleep, something soft scraping along the floor. Still groggy, I assumed it was a machine or someone passing in the hallway and tried to ignore it. Then I heard it again, closer this time, right outside the door. I turned on the lamp and noticed a small white shape protruding from beneath the door. Moving carefully, I picked it up and realized it was a folded note. Inside, written in uneven, shaky handwriting, were a few words claiming that someone inside the hotel was watching me. My pulse spiked instantly. There had been no footsteps, no voices, just silence before and after the note appeared. Unsure of what to do, I latched the chain lock, sat on the bed with my back against the wall, and kept the light on, knowing sleep was no longer an option. Roughly 20 minutes passed before the sound returned. I stared at the gap under the door as another piece of paper slid through, slow and deliberate. This message was worse. It claimed the writer had been inside my room earlier that day and admitted to enjoying watching people sleep there. The handwriting looked even more unstable than before. Panic washed over me as I searched the room, checking under the bed, inside the closet, and behind the shower curtain, even though I knew I was alone. I considered calling the front desk, but hesitated. It was after 2 in the morning, and a creeping suspicion told me whoever was doing this might work there. I tried to convince myself it was some cruel prank, but it felt too intimate, too targeted. I sat in silence, flinching at every tiny noise, promising myself that if another note appeared, I would leave immediately. For a while, nothing happened, and I began to calm down. Then the 3rd note came, sliding in more slowly than the others, as if the person wanted to savor the moment. The message was short and horrifying. They were already inside the room with me again. I read it over and over, scanning the room in a slow circle, my chest tightening as I imagined someone just out of sight. I grabbed my bag, checked the peephole, and saw an empty hallway. I unlocked the door and bolted, running down the corridor and toward the stairs. Once, I glanced back and thought I saw a shadow retreat near the far end of the hall. At the front desk, a different employee listened with confusion and claimed there were only a few guests on that floor. He offered to move me or let me leave, and I chose to check out immediately. Before I went, he accompanied me back upstairs, where everything looked normal, except the window latch, which was broken in a way that seemed recent. He suggested someone might have entered from outside. I didn't argue. I left, drove to another hotel, and barely slept. The next day, the original hotel insisted nothing else had been found, and no cameras showed anything suspicious. They acted like it was all a misunderstanding, but I didn't believe them. The broken window latch still haunts me, and I can't shake the feeling that someone had been slipping in and out of that room long before I ever realized I was being watched. I never went back. I had been driving through Virginia on my way to visit family when exhaustion finally caught up with me, forcing me to stop for the night. It was close to midnight when I pulled into a modest-looking hotel that appeared clean but lifeless, with only a handful of cars scattered across the parking lot and most of the building swallowed in darkness. Inside, the lobby felt just as empty. The man behind the front desk barely acknowledged me as he slid a key across the counter, and I headed up to the 3rd floor. The hallway lights were dim, and nearly every door had a "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging from the handle, giving the impression that everyone inside wanted to be left alone. My room sat at the very end of the corridor. When I stepped inside, nothing was obviously wrong, yet something felt off. The lamp leaned slightly, one dresser drawer was half open, and the blanket on the bed was creased near the edge, as if someone had been sitting there not long ago. I told myself housekeeping must have rushed through, dropped my bag on a chair, turned on the television, and tried to sleep. Lying there, though, I couldn't stop thinking about how strangely unsettled the room had looked when I arrived. The front desk clerk hadn't mentioned cleaning staff, and the whole place felt far too empty. Eventually, exhaustion won out. I don't know how long I slept before a faint sound pulled me awake, the slow, careful turning of my doorknob. At first I thought it was just the air conditioner, but then the handle shifted again, softly, deliberately, like someone testing the lock. In the dim glow of the television, I could see the shadow of the handle move. Whoever was outside paused, then I heard a thin scrape of metal against the lock, unmistakably the sound of a key being inserted. The lock turned, the door nudged inward just enough to let a sliver of hallway light spill in, then stopped. No footsteps followed, no voice, just the door easing shut again. I lay there for nearly an hour, tense and listening, until I convinced myself it had been a staff mistake. I rechecked the lock and eventually drifted back to sleep. Around 2:15 in the morning I woke again, this time to the faint rustle of movement inside the room. Before I could even fully sit up, I knew someone else was there. When I did raise myself, the sound stopped, and in the darkness I saw a barely visible figure hovering near my bag in the corner. My voice came out shaky as I asked who was there. A deep male voice replied calmly that it was housekeeping and that he was leaving. I didn't answer. I watched the shadow move toward the door, heard it open and close, then snapped on the light and latched the chain. My bag had clearly been searched. After steadying myself, I called the front desk and told them someone had entered my room with a key. They insisted no housekeeping staff were on duty. I gathered my belongings, went down to the lobby and called the police, demanding to see the security footage. When officers arrived, the footage revealed a large, unsettling man wandering the hallways, returning to my door multiple times before finally unlocking it and going inside. The clerk claimed the man didn't work there and must have stolen a master key. I got a refund and left immediately, driving another half hour before giving up and sleeping in my car. That night permanently changed how I see hotels. I sometimes wonder if I should have taken legal action, but instead I try not to think about it at all. I used to work night shifts for a small delivery company, and on my days off I often took short weekend trips alone just to escape the routine. On one of those trips, I stopped at a cheap hotel in New Jersey because it was close to a hiking trail I planned to visit the next morning. The place wasn't awful, but it felt old and stale, and the hallways were unnervingly quiet, as if I were the only guest. I checked in early that evening, and the woman at the front desk casually mentioned that housekeeping had already finished cleaning all the rooms for the night, a detail I didn't think much about until later. My room was on the second floor, and the hallway light flickered as I walked toward it. I was exhausted and ignored the uneasy atmosphere, focused only on eating, showering, and sleeping. At first glance, the room looked clean, the bed neatly made, though the pillow on the chair sat at an odd angle. I straightened it without thinking, turned on the small television, snacked for a while, and then took a shower. When I came back out, the mirror was fogged, and the room felt noticeably colder. I brushed it off and climbed into bed, but my eyes kept drifting toward a dark corner near the closet, where it felt like someone might be standing just out of sight. Eventually I fell asleep, only to wake sometime after midnight to a faint, unfamiliar sound, something softly sliding across the carpet near that same corner. I lay still, half awake, telling myself it was my imagination, until I heard slow, careful breathing that wasn't my own, coming from near the closet. Fear hit me instantly. The sound didn't match the air conditioner, and when I finally forced myself to sit up, I saw that the closet door, one I clearly remembered leaving fully open, was now slightly closed. The breathing stopped the moment I moved, as if whatever was there realized I was awake. Frozen with fear, I eventually backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off the closet, and slipped into the hallway. It was empty and somehow even quieter than before. Downstairs, the front desk was unattended, the phone ringing unanswered, until the same woman appeared and calmly insisted no one else had access to guest rooms. She agreed to check the room with me, but when we went back, everything looked normal again. The closet wide open, the pillow straight, nothing disturbed. Embarrassed and doubting myself, I moved to another room down the hall, locked the door, and tried to rest. An hour later, just as I began drifting off, I heard the slow squeak of a housekeeping cart rolling through the hallway, long after cleaning hours. The cart stopped outside my door, followed by that same heavy, deliberate breathing right on the other side. Something pressed gently against the door, not knocking, just feeling it. When the sounds finally faded and the cart rolled away, I stayed awake until sunrise. As I checked out, a different employee told me they hadn't had a night housekeeper for over a week. The woman had simply stopped showing up and admitted she had keys to every room. I left immediately, unable to stop thinking about how I'd been told the rooms were already cleaned, about the breathing, and about the closet door moving on its own. I'm convinced someone had been hiding in that hotel long before I ever arrived, and that they were still there while I slept. I work as a house person at a hotel, a role that blends maintenance with housekeeping, mostly helping the front desk by fixing guest appliances, delivering supplies, and keeping shared areas in order, including the pool. The incident I can't forget happened during the summer of 2023, shortly after my boss hired a new night front desk employee. I'll call her Brianna. Because she was new, my schedule shifted so I could assist her during the night hours, and since it was a Wednesday, the hotel was completely dead with no expected check-ins. We spent most of the evening chatting while handling routine tasks, until I went to restock the pool area. Guests need a key to access the pool, but employees are issued master keys, so I unlocked the door and went inside. The pool has a small storage room where we keep towels and chemicals, and when I saw the towel rack was nearly empty, I went in to grab more. As I bent down to pick up the last towel, I suddenly heard something hit the water behind me. The sound was loud enough to make me jump and drop everything. When I rushed back out, I saw one of our lifesaver rings floating in the middle of the pool, which made no sense. It could only have gotten there if someone had thrown it. I checked the entire pool area, but I was completely alone. I pulled the lifesaver out, finished restocking the towels and left, unsettled but trying to brush it off. When I asked Brianna if anyone had been to the pool, she said no, and I didn't mention what happened because she was new and I didn't want to sound unhinged. The rest of the night stayed quiet until around 9:30 p.m. when I picked up a maintenance request for room 324, a toilet that wouldn't flush. I headed upstairs and let myself into the empty room, knowing the guest wasn't arriving until Friday. As I knelt in the bathroom adjusting the toilet's internal parts, I suddenly felt the temperature drop sharply, like the air had been sucked of all warmth. The hairs on my arms stood straight up as I paused and scanned the vents, confused, because it was a warm summer night and there was no reason for cold air. Just as quickly as it came, the chill vanished and the room returned to normal. The thermostat read 68 degrees, which only made my nerves worse, especially after the pool incident. I focused on finishing the repair, and a couple of minutes later the toilet flushed properly again. Relief washed over me, until a heavy thump echoed from somewhere outside the bathroom. I froze, and that same unnatural cold flooded the room again. My heart pounded as I slowly stepped out of the bathroom and looked toward the beds. The phone on the nightstand was dangling off the edge, but my eyes were drawn past it, to the far corner of the room, where an impossibly tall figure stood motionless beside the bed. It was nothing but a solid black silhouette, featureless and unnaturally still, like a shape cut out of darkness itself. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, until I saw it shift, just slightly, but enough to know it wasn't my imagination. Instinct took over. I sprinted for the door, flung it open and bolted out, nearly hitting myself in the face as I slammed it shut behind me. I didn't look back. I went straight to the front desk, told Brianna I was clocking out, and left without another word. The entire drive home, my mind replayed everything. The pool, the cold air, the shadow in that room, and I realized whatever I saw couldn't have been human. I still try to tell myself it was stress or exhaustion playing tricks on me, but nothing like that has ever happened before or since. And to this day, that night remains the most terrifying experience of my life.